Hello and welcome to Chapter 3 video presentation. Chapter 3 is the first part of the topic called Planning Procurement. This topic will be covered or touched upon in several chapters of this book. This Chapter 3 video presentation, just like all video presentations in this course, are based on a book titled Project Procurement Management, Contracting, Subcontracting, Teaming by Quentin Fleming. After completing this chapter, you should be able to do the following. First of all, explain why procurement planning is an essential phase in project planning or project management. Also, to explain how project scope and work breakdown structure help in procurement planning. How is procurement related to work breakdown structure and overall project planning? Also, you should be able to explain how organizational strategies influence procurements. Explain why IT outsourcing is so common and why many organizations, when they run their IT departments or start an IT or telecommunications project, why they prefer to procure or outsource the entire department or a portion of a project. Also, you should be able to list common reasons for making the so-called make decisions. In other words, deciding to do something internally as opposed to procuring it from outside. And also list common reasons for the so-called buy decisions, which is related to procurement. When you're deciding to buy something, you're buying it from the outside of the organization typically. Also, you should be able to discuss how potential sellers are identified for buy items, explain how procurements are typically funded within an organization, also explain how funding of procurements influences project cost, explain what types of procurements should be identified at the scope definition phase, and also list all the relevant pieces of information that can be included in a procurement matrix at the procurement planning phase. Okay, some introductory statements about procurement planning. It's an essential phase. You need to start planning for procurement early on, and if your project includes significant buy components, then successful procurement is something that also defines the overall success of your project. And that's why planning for procurement should begin with project initiation. In other words, just when you start thinking about a project, just when you start to formally define your project, you should also start about the possible items that you will procure from outside. Also, project procurement planning requires a clearly defined project scope, overall project scope, because it is only after you know what you're planning to accomplish with your project that you should have a good foundational understanding of what are the items or what are the services that need to be procured for your project. It also requires scope decomposition to identify what needs to be procured early on. One good example of an artifact that clearly communicates scope decomposition is work breakdown structure. So once you break down your project scope into individual tasks or work items, that's a good place to start thinking about which items will be accomplished internally and which items will be procured from outside. So, and this analysis that leads to the decision of buying versus making is the so-called make or buy analysis. It's used to determine what will be procured and what will be produced or carried out internally. The final most important deliverable of the procurement planning phase is the so-called procurement management plan, which is typically a part of an overall project plan related to the entire project that you're trying to accomplish as an organization or as a project manager. Now, defining scope is a critical phase. Project managers, when they think about project scope, they need to define, first of all, what they will do, and by the virtue of having a very clear definition of what they will do for the project, they will also have a better understanding of what they will not do. It is very important to avoid large changes to project scope, and typically most organizations, most project managers, they are good at it. They're good at avoiding large changes to project scope, but it is minor adjustments that are typically, that typically either fall through the cracks or just slowly crawl in, or they're a result of some compromises that is made. And those even minor adjustments, they can cause project scope creep. Scope creep means that the project scope keeps evolving, keeps changing, and that's one of the most important failure factors behind any project. When a scope keeps changing, the scope keeps growing, or the initial requirements, they keep getting modified, and that's something that can lead to the failure of the project. Also, when defining scope, you need to avoid statements or formulations that are too general, because if they're too general, then it's not clear what needs to be done. Then people may slip in additional, stakeholders may slip in additional requirements, and overall the team may be not very sure on what exactly needs to be done. Now, a work breakdown structure, or WBS, is a great way to formalize project scope in specific terms in terms of specific work items or actions. And a work breakdown structure is also a starting point for determining what will be bought and what will be procured. Because once you have a clear list in front of you of all the things that need to be done, that's a good place to start reflecting on what are the work items in the work breakdown structure that will be accomplished internally and which ones will be procured from outside. Now, the make or buy analysis should start with strategic considerations for the company. Some strategic essential questions that any organization should be able to ask, in general and also before initiating any kind of project, are the following: why are we in business? In other words, what is the single most important thing that we're producing as a company? What is our main product? What is the reason for our existence? What has made us successful as a business, right? The things that made us successful as a business, those are their competencies or strengths, and those are the things we should leverage, right? Those are the things that we should use for doing things internally. And that leads to the related question: what are our core competencies? Because most likely the things that made the company successful are the so-called core competency, meaning some key areas of experience or expertise that have been very helpful in ensuring organizational success over the years. Now, once those questions are answered, especially the question in relation to core competency, then a company should make something if it's related to its core competencies, right? So don't buy something that you can do yourself better than competitors. However, if a work item is not related to the core competencies, then the company should consider procuring this item externally. In other words, subcontracting this job or buying this asset from outside. Now, external procurements are also called outsourcing sometimes. This term is especially common in IT industry, and also outsourcing is quite common in IT. A lot of people blame IT departments for making themselves vulnerable. A lot of managers, a lot of scholars, they're saying that IT departments, they are vulnerable to outsourcing because they're often viewed as complicated. A normal, meaning non-technology executive, can have hard times understanding what the department does. Expensive, nobody understands what they do, but they keep asking for a lot of money. And also non-responsive to business needs, the needs of regular employees. There are some executives that think that technology people are obsessed with technology for the sake of technology. They don't really think about using technology to help business. But also it should be noted that this idea, this negative perception has changed, not even recently, but I would say over the last 10, 20 years. Nowadays, most technology executives that have met, technology leaders, they are also business people, so they have no problems relating to the business side of things and understanding the business needs and how those business needs can be supported with technology. So I think this is becoming a less common criticism. I think out of all those factors, the expense factor is number one that makes IT vulnerable. Companies are always looking for ways to reduce their expense, and because IT is typically quite expensive, they become a chief candidate for outsourcing in order to save money. And naturally, given this demand for outsourcing IT services and leasing certain IT assets from outside, such as storage or anything else related to hardware and software, there are many firms that offer IT outsourcing services. And some of those firms are domestic. There are also international firms, let's say based in India, which can help a company in the United States with some of the services delivered by the IT department. And overall, I would say that IT outsourcing was a big thing maybe 15 years ago. Everybody was talking about it, to the point where some IT professionals were worried that the entire IT sector, U.S. IT sector, would be outsourced, but it didn't happen. Of course, outsourcing is still common; it happens, but it's not as dramatic as people thought it would be. Okay, so what are some common reasons for make decisions apart from that strategic consideration that the things that you make internally are related to core competencies? Number one, protecting proprietary technologies or trade secrets. There are certain organizations that deal with confidential data, or their data is used as their most strategic resource, And that's why even if they find an opportunity to outsource their IT department or a portion of it to an external party, they're very reluctant to do that because they're afraid that if they do it, then some proprietary technologies that they're using or some confidential data in relation to their operations or clients will be leaked. So it's not about price for them; it's about protecting their core competencies, right? So that's why they can be very reluctant to outsource something even if the price is good. Sometimes organizations have a surplus of staff to do a particular type of work. I guess it's a good thing. A lot of organizations, when they have somebody who is redundant, doesn't have much work to do, instead of firing that person or department, they would put them on a project that is beneficial for the entire organization. Also, idle plant capacity. If you're saying, okay, well, it may not be a part of our core competency, but we have an idle capacity, we'll just go ahead and produce those items on our own. And sometimes it's the need to control work, let's say, to ensure either some legal compliance, let's say in relation to privacy laws, privacy regulations, or to ensure quality. Let's say an organization is very reluctant to outsource something that is strategic to their success, and they want to control the entire production process, and that's why because outsourcing or procuring things from outside, by its nature involves releasing some of the control. They don't want to do that. They want to maintain full control over how a particular item is produced. Now, some common reasons for buy decisions. Those are the two most common reasons. Sometimes a company lacks resources for performing work. A company may not have any idle employees that do not have anything to do on a daily basis. So that's why they would subcontract somebody from outside to do the job. And oftentimes it's lack of expertise. The company in question feels that they don't have experts. They don't want to hire them. They don't want to grow their internal experts. They don't want to build their internal expertise and competencies in this particular area. So they will just acquire those expertise by subcontracting somebody to do a particular job for them. Now, once a buy decision is made, the company releases much of its control to an external vendor. By definition, they are asking another organization to do something, and they have very little control over that other organization. So that's where contractual mechanisms need to be developed. By that we mean contracts or agreements between a buyer and a seller in relation to scope, what has to be done, timeline, in which period of time you're planning everything to be ready for you, and also most importantly cost. That's the number of factors for how much the seller agrees to deliver a product or a service. Now, critical buys should be identified early on to allow for plenty of time for procurement planning and execution. This is especially true for new products and services. They may require a lot of uncertainty, a lot of background research, a lot of hurdles, legal and policy hurdles to overcome. So, buying things may not be easy. I mean, it's not that if you're buying things you'll get it tomorrow. It's not like that. It may take a lot of time. So that's why critical procurement should be identified early on. Now, some items, they fall in between make or buy. So in other words, it's not clear whether it makes more sense for a company to make it internally or to buy it externally. And this is where a detailed, clear analysis needs to be performed to see which side seems to overtake, the make side or the buy side. Now, when it comes to locating potential sellers for a product or service, most goods and services, they are not problematic in a sense that they're readily available in the marketplace, and procuring them does not constitute a major hurdle. Now, there are some exceptions, of course. Sometimes there is only one vendor for a particular product or service, so this company has a virtual monopoly. And if they do, then the vendor can dictate price and contractual terms. So an example of a vendor that may have a monopoly or something close to a local monopoly would be, let's say if you're operating in a small rural area, there may be only one utilities company that is available for you. So, and they may be able to dictate price to a certain extent, let's say for electricity for your factory, and contractual terms, because if you don't want to buy, let's say, water or electricity from them, you need to relocate several hours away. So those are difficult situations sometimes for a buyer to negotiate. Or sometimes when a required item does not exist. Now that's, it's typically a major complexity procurement, and if an item does not exist, then there should be a lot of time and money invested into planning, detailed specifications. So that's why it's not an easy type of procurement. A lot of organizations nowadays, to ease procurement, they have a well-developed formal database of potential suppliers to match their project needs, so you don't even have to do your research. You'll just ask somebody at the procurement department, like, who are the vendors on file for a particular product, and they'll give you a few names. Yes, sometimes a product specialist in the procurement department already knows which vendors are good to work with in relation to a particular product or service. Now, funding is a very important aspect of procurement planning. Ideally, procurements need to be fully funded early in the life cycle of a project. Now, in reality, many projects are funded in a piecemeal fashion. Funds are allocated over time and not necessarily in their entirety. In other words, some portion of the promised fund may be missing. I've experienced that myself many times. There is a project and somebody promises, let's say, $500,000, and then at the end, you don't get $500,000, you get 1/10 of that, which is $50,000. And you don't get it immediately, you get it like after a few months. Now, this is the problem with partial funding, funding a particular project in a piecemeal fashion. While internal work can be put on pause due to lack of funding, external procurements cannot, because most likely there will be a contract that obliges you to pay by a certain date. Now, lack of funding for an already initiated external procurement arrangements leads to the two types of consequences: contractual penalties if you don't pay on time, or a vendor may act like they're trying to help you. They will say, okay, we're not gonna charge you anything, but then they will also renegotiate some of the terms of the contract. They're saying, okay, let's rethink what we agreed upon. So and they view it as fair because they're making a step forward, but by not punishing you for late payment. And they also expect you to make a step forward and give them some freedom in some of the contractual terms so that they can profit from the situation as well. So executives should understand that if full funding for procurement is not provided, they may have to pay a premium price, and that can lead to all kinds of other problems. I can relate to that. There are situations in my work where I get a quote from a vendor about something, and they give you a good quote, and then I'm saying, okay, I'll get back to you. So I'm trying to get this to get this whole thing through the procurement department to get all the authorization to buy it, and it takes sometimes a month. And then by the time I get all those authorization, I go back to the vendor and I say, okay, I'm ready to buy it, and they say, look, our quote already expired. We gave you a quote for, I don't know, valid for 2 weeks or 1 week, and you came back in a few weeks after. So now we're going to give you a new quote, and they give me like a new quote, which is a higher price, right? So timely funding is essential. Now, scope definition should already include some degree of procurement planning. This is especially true for major complexity procurements. The scope should already contain some level of detail as to what exactly needs to be bought from outside, because major complexity procurements, they require more time. Now, at the end, it may be worthwhile to create a list of procurements. All items to be procured should be listed and classified in their complexity levels, and this is often called the so-called procurement matrix. Also, it may be worthwhile to assign responsibility for items to be procured, and those people responsible should be identified early on. If you don't make anybody responsible, then chances are high that nothing will ever happen. And typically, each procurement item should involve participation of the following people: project manager or project team member, a responsible engineer or technical specialist who will provide the technical expertise, the technical perspective on products or services being procured, and also the responsible buyer, meaning somebody from the procurement department, because they are ultimately in charge of making most of the organizational procurement. Maybe at this stage, when you create a list of procurements at the scope definition phase, potential vendors should be identified as well, and also dates for procurements should be identified and verified in relation to the entire work breakdown structure of the project, so that items needed for your project are procured on time.